Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and I want to talk really quickly about the 3 reasons why retro video game collecting just does not feel the same anymore in 2026. And I'm going to get the first one out of the way right off the bat, and that is the money factor. If we're all being honest, the money for the majority of people just doesn't feel the same January 2026 as it felt maybe in January of 2020 or January of 2021. Bills are at an all-time high. Prices just seem to keep going through the roof. And even beyond that, more and more people are losing their job. And we're not talking about the jobs like, people who work at Chick-fil-A or at Shake Shack. A lot of the jobs that are being lost by white collar professionals, many of whom are in that age range where they had the financial capability to build retro gaming collections. And if you're someone who was impacted by the 1.2 million jobs that were lost in 2025, if even 1% of the people who collect video, if 1% of that population were video game collectors, that's a lot of people to be instantly eliminated from the hobby of buying and selling retro games, right? And a lot of them probably turned into sellers more so than buyers. So the money factor is a huge um, crushing weight on game collecting, and I think it's having a big impact in the game collecting market as a whole. A lot of people, are shifting their priorities. A lot of people are reevaluating what's important right now. And even if they're not giving up video game collecting completely, they're definitely slowing down. And even here on YouTube, we've seen a lot of people who have sold their collection off in 2025. You saw a lot of people who have, decided to kind of focus on other things and go in other directions. A few notable ones. Well, the biggest one to me was Gamers Manual, who had probably one of the best collections that I've seen on YouTube. It wasn't large, but it was potent. He had one of the most potent collections on YouTube. It wasn't just a shelf full of games. Everything he had was pure heat, like Heatles. So, and even he wound up selling his collection to do what? Invest in real estate, right? So you're seeing that. You're seeing where people are kind of shifting their focus, and they're kind of adjusting their priorities. So again, the money factor, and how people's money situation is looking in 2026, I think is a huge factor as to why collecting just doesn't feel the same. And that kind of rolls into reason number two, which is there is a there is a quiet conglomerate of sellers out there who are quietly liquidating their collections. And this is having an impact in a very subtle way. And what I mean is that you have a lot more quiet sellers out there who are willing to take a lot less for their games because, again, of the shift in priorities. So they're not holding on to games as much. They're willing to accept lower prices. And I've even experienced this personally. Just recently, I was able to pick up a copy of Bomberman for the Sega Saturn at a really good deal. What I thought was a good deal for a game that normally goes for anywhere between $500 and $600. Now, and that's one of the things that you're going to start to see is that the price charting prices and what games are actually selling for. And I'm not talking about what they're selling for on eBay, right? Because people who are still willing to buy on eBay are going to buy on eBay, but there are cash deals being done. There are local deals being done, quiet deals being done, and these deals are not being tracked by price charting. They're not being tracked on a website that price charting can reference. They're not being done on Mercari or on eBay. They're being done on Facebook Marketplace. They're being done at local meetups and trade sessions. They're being done at the swap meets. And so I think this is also impacting the way I think resellers approach the hobby. And also I think it's impacting the way collectors approach the hobby because I think collectors are becoming more frugal. They're becoming more, I think, just diligent. They're really looking for those deals. I don't think people are as willing to just, spend money willy nilly on video games, and they're really kind of focusing on the dollar amounts, and so that's also having a big impact. The last reason why I think it doesn't feel the same, especially here on YouTube, is the collecting community, especially when it comes to retro video game collecting, has really morphed over the last 5 years. I would say prior to COVID, you had the OG retro video game YouTubers who had been talking about retro games for a really long time, and they took more of a, historian, documentary type of approach to, just talking about retro games. And when I think about that, I think about channels like, Sega Lord X, CGR Undertow, gaming channels like that really kind of broke games down, SNES Drunk or SNES Punk, channels like that really kind of just broke down certain retro games and gave you, like, real honest reviews on games. But what happened was, like, around the time of the pandemic, when a lot of people were either being reintroduced to retro video games or being introduced to video games for the first time, or if you were someone like me who grew up playing those retro video games, but, like, life took over and you just started living life and you completely forgot about retro video games. But then when you were stuck in the house, by, government mandate, you returned to retro games and it reignited that fire in you. That was what it was for me. And so around the time of 2020, 2021, especially on YouTube, what it felt like was there was a lot of excitement around collecting video games. And so people would run out, they would go game hunting, they would find games, they would buy them, and they would either show you them, they would show you or take you along with them for their video game hunting. Or if you were a channel like mine, even if I didn't take you along with the, for the game hunting journey, I would come back and I would make a video about the games that I found or the games that I picked up or the things that I've added to my collection. And so the focus was on getting the games and playing the games. And the content was kind of like a byproduct of that. The content came secondary, the collecting was primary. And over the years, over the last 5 years, there's been kind of a shift where the content has become primary and the collecting has become secondary. So, collecting is kind of like being done just to be able to create the content and try and hopes to try and generate the views. And some channels have been really successful over the last 5 years. I've seen some channels really blow up, and do great. And those channels are still going strong today. Some of them have, I think some are approaching 100,000 subscribers. They've done really well. And that was just through consistency, through great editing, through being original and having their own original take, their own original flair, and that's kind of, I've seen that happen. And you do have those channels, but then you also have the other channels who just really tried too hard. They tried to do what other channels were doing. They were just very, it was just very apparent that it was about the content. And so here now in 2026, you really have a lot smaller number of channels to really turn to for, just retro video game collecting content. And it feels like those channels have somehow, like, clicked up or grouped up, and they kind of all run together in the same circles. They all, like, go to the same conventions, they all, like, feature each other on each other's channels. And so it kind of feels like you're hearing from the same group. Whereas, like, in 2021, there were so many smaller channels and so many different voices and so many different perspectives that it just felt a lot more eclectic. It felt like if you went to YouTube and typed in retro game hunting or retro game collecting, you'd get, like, this, smorgasbord of just different takes and opinions and, collecting stories. And there were so many people doing it from so many different parts of the country. You could see someone in Philly, someone in Florida, someone in Texas, someone in Arkansas, someone in New York, Cali, Michigan, Indiana. It just, you know, people were all over the place. And I think just having all those different takes and perspectives was what made the YouTube retro game collecting experience a lot more fun and exciting, and you kind of wanted to come back for more. Whereas, like I said, I think today it just kind of feels like there's just like maybe like the top 5 or 10 channels, and this is no knock to them. They did everything right, so I'm not gonna knock them for what they've done. But it kind of feels, it starts to feel like everybody's saying the same thing, like everybody's liking the same games, they're talking about the same stuff. They're honing in and focusing on some of the same things, and so that I think just kind of gets boring. I know there's a lot of people who really like smaller channels. They don't necessarily like the bigger channels, because once you get to a certain size of a channel and you start doing like brand affiliations and you start getting sponsorships and things like that, there is a certain there's a certain level that you get to where you lose a level of freedom in your speech, I think, because you don't want to lose your sponsorships. You don't want to lose you don't want to lose those things. And it's like the difference between someone who works for like ESPN and it does commentating on ESPN versus a person who just has like a podcast and they run their own podcast on YouTube. The person who's running their podcast is going to be a lot more blunt. The stories that they share are going to be a lot less edited. They're going to curse. They're going to be more, because there's a lot less rules. And so once you as a channel get to a certain point where you're getting sponsorships and brand deals and stuff, there comes a line that you have to toe. And I think it just changes your whole approach to the game. And so I say all that to say that the community does feel different. Um, and even for someone like myself, I'm not even on here posting like I used to. I used to post every day. I used to post on YouTube like sometimes 3 times a day, 4 times a day. And there's so much going on that I can't do it anymore. But those are the 3 reasons why I think it doesn't feel the same. Now, on my end, um, the reason why I'm not doing it anymore is because I am moving, guys. I'm moving. I'm not going to tell you guys where I'm moving to yet, but we are packing up. They're packing up the house. We're packing up a lot of stuff. We've just been donating and selling and packing and giving stuff away, because the type of move that we're making is a very large move. And so I'm going to share more of that with you. But this is just really cool what's happening with my family and I. I'm so stoked. So stoked. It's just crazy. And I can't believe that we got this opportunity. And, selling my collection was a necessity. Like, I had my doubts at first when I sold my collection. I was like, should I have sold it? But just seeing everything that I have to do now, selling my collection was the best thing I could have ever done, because it would have been a way more of a headache, way more of a nightmare trying to navigate the things I'm doing now and figure out what I was going to do with 1,500 games. There's no way I would have been able to. It would have been crazy. So it was definitely the right move for me. But more to come on all of that. Let me know what you guys think about this. It's been a while since I've made one of these types of videos for you guys, but I felt like, I wanted to drop a video. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think the internet vibes, do you think the retro collecting scene feels the same? Do you think it's different? Let me know what you think. I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.